All right, welcome back to Interview At, where we teach you how to use the Amazon leadership principles to land your dream job. My name is Brandon Watson, a former senior executive from Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, a bunch of startups you've never heard of, Wall Street, and well, just a lot of things. I currently run an advisory firm, and what I do there is I help companies grow, and a lot of that has to do with hiring. And so I do a lot of these mock interviews because, well, I like helping people, and I had a lot of help on my way up in my 3 decades in the tech industry. This week, we have a candidate who is focused on getting a marketing, very senior level marketing role at a very, very top company, definitely in the FANG M category, and even the group that he was targeting, very high profile. So this candidate was really going for it. The leadership principle that we're covering this week is ownership. And the specific question was around, tell me about a time that you had a big miss relative to your commitments. So let's jump into it, see how he answers the question, and we'll follow on with comments as we go. What is the biggest miss you've had, I guess ever, we can go anywhere on your resume, that you've ever had in terms of commitments that you had promised?
Biggest miss. Oh man. What I would say. What I would say about that is right now what's going on is I promised when I came into this organization. I'll use this as an example. Probably could think of a couple of others. I came into this organization saying, hey, look, I understand that there are a lot of KPIs here. But the one I'm going to get up for you, the one I'm going to increase, the one I'm going to show value in terms of the work I'm doing is on that brand awareness piece. Is getting people to recognize this as a brand, and that is not happening as fast as I wanted to. The data is showing that we are moving in the right direction. We're going from the lower left to the upper right on the chart. But particularly as of late, the last couple of years, the rate of growth in those results have been starting to stall out. And so again, that goes back to some of the things that I'm doing to help figure out, not only on the creative side, and messaging and strategy side, but also even on the media side. Hey, what are we doing? Let's examine all of our strategies. No sacred cows. Let's figure out how we reignite the growth in that space. So that's the quick and dirty answer to that question.
Yes, marketing generally in the past has been somewhat seen as a less rigorous discipline, but certainly in the area of digital marketing, ownership of data and really speaking to outcomes with hard numbers is important. And in this case, I would say, the candidate could have done a better job. It was pretty vague, right? Not happening as fast as we wanted. The company, as a brand, right, being how they were thought of, it's kind of insufficient, especially for someone who's coming in with a VP title and targeting a fairly senior role at a very top company. He did kind of reference that's the quick and dirty, as if this was his kind of quick setup. So from a structure point of view, it leaves me wanting. So in some senses, that's okay, because I'll ask a lot of follow-on questions as an interviewer, but it definitely, it's not setting the right tone as far as the altitude at which the candidate is flying, because it just feels too vague, as if they're not in the details, and that starts to tickle the red flag just a little bit. Okay, well, so what do you think the primary driver was for the delta between what you thought you could do and what's actually happening?
I would say that the primary driver for that delta was it's just like with Wall Street, right? They talk about you beat expectations. Well, was that because you did very well or the expectations were off? And I think in this case, my expectations, I guess my model, if you will, for the speed with which we would be able to get there was incorrect, in that I missed a variable. And the variable was exactly what I was talking about before. The notion that we'll say the absence of the mindset that this is a branded category, and the ability to shift the mind to start thinking about basically a commoditized space as a brand. That takes a lot longer and probably a lot more, again, psychological nuggets and efforts that we need to be making that we haven't been making to date. And so that is probably the biggest miss as far as the data point that I didn't consider 7 years ago when I made that statement, at least didn't consider it and put a high enough weighting on that equation.
And so again, VP marketing. Can't you can't be this vague. You just can't. Not in this day and age when so much data is available. This person, I don't want to say what industry they were coming from, but I would say that you can make allowances that this is not the industry from which they were coming was not the most rigorous as far as data use in marketing, which is fine. But the candidate named the variable, but then just kind of failed to add context to their assertion that things didn't work. How was the variable measured? How often? How reliably? How did the lack of inclusion of the variable create a case where the model was wrong? Right? Like, if you're going to talk to it. But if you talk to it in vague terms, it ultimately sounds like, this is how it presents. Again, and let me kind of sidetrack here. I'll do the sidetrack over here. Look, an interviewer only has 45 minutes with you. So you got to maximize that time. And if you don't maximize that time, they're gonna develop their own story about you. And in this case, the story that's developing is someone who's just not in the details, leaving someone else to do the work, getting stuff reported back to them, and he's now reporting out on it as if he's reporting up to a CEO, but he's not providing me the interviewer details that gives me the warm and fuzzies that he could do this on a repeated basis without some sort of support infrastructure behind him. I ask this question. At what point during the cycle, right? Like you made a commitment, I'm assuming when you came in or some time after that, or maybe when you took the new role, because I know you've been promoted in role, but you made a commitment and you're not getting there.
Yeah.
Where in there do you feel like, or I guess, yeah, when did you raise this with stakeholders? You weren't going to get there. When did you realize and when did you raise it with stakeholders? Walk me through that process.
So my timeline was 5 years. I wanted 5 years to get to 30%. That's what I wanted.
Brand awareness.
Yes, to get from what was we started out with 4% back in 2014, now at 20%. So I'm 10% short of my goal 2 years after when I wanted to deliver it. So we decided
you're at minus 10 at plus 2.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Correct. So I made a call on this 2 years ago by saying, hey, we're not where I want to be. Well, we need to make some changes. So what we've done, and the changes are not only just in terms of test and learn, but more permanent changes, even as it pertains to some of the partners that we have, specifically have to do with strategy. So, and by the way, the number I gave you was for general market. I also run Hispanic. And a good example for the Hispanic side is we completely changed the strategy in terms of who we're targeting and how we're targeting them. A good example would be going from, we'll say from from first generation to second generation, and also going off of Spanish TV to having Spanish language ads on English content, making changes like that. As well as, again, looking at some of the more specific data points around what we need to be doing from a media channel standpoint. How do we leverage PR better? Doing a lot of those things to try to get those numbers up. And then finally, what I would say is making sure that we are completely aligned, not only from what we're doing to how we're testing it, because your sample piece, the sample within how you're testing for these data needs to align, or really it's the other way around. Your approach from a strategy and targeting standpoint, media, creative, and so on, needs to align with who you're asking. And so I think a little bit of that was off as well. We weren't. Okay, this one I had to jump in on because it just is a teaching tool, right? There is a few things at this level, VP title level. There is an expectation of command of the material. And this comes down to story selection as well as story structure in this interview. Because again, 45 minutes, you're trying to communicate a lot. I get that. The candidate jumped over 7 years of a timeline without really providing a lot of clarity as to what did they do. He even talks about, well, we need to get on the same page, how we were measuring and how often, but
what does that even mean, right? Especially in a 7-year window when you're still not at a target that you set with a 5-year window, which ask anybody to do 5-year planning. It's like, all right, good luck. 3 years is probably the best you can do. But you're talking about you made a 5-year plan. It was maybe ambitious, maybe not, hard to know, but without additional numbers kind of at the outset, really impossible to know. And then didn't get there, and he's now +2 but -10%. So like what happened? What did they try? What didn't work? 7 years is a large amount of time to get stuff done. I don't care what industry you're in. And none of that content was provided. And so, as someone who's looking at someone who's a leader, especially someone who, in the context of this answer, they stated they were promoted, what did they do? I want to feel great coming out of this virtual room, from an interview thinking, wow, this guy, this gal is amazing. I can talk about what they did and I feel like, oh, that would work here. But I don't have any of that detail here. And so this is where the lack of preparation of the stories and lack of the kind of core details being in your working memory, it's, as a candidate, is really going to affect how you're perceived by the person interviewing you. Remember, they're going to interview a bunch of candidates. You are but one person, and you might be big fish, small pond in your company, maybe even big fish, small pond in your industry. But some of these companies, especially the ones that, people who come to interview at are targeting, it's a lot of, kind of small fish in big ponds, right? Because it's some really, really talented people, but there's a lot of them. And so you got to stand out. And being this vague and this high level without details, without command of the material that demonstrates that you understand what work was done and how to do it well and how to execute over a prolonged period of time with great success, none of that landed here.
Aligned as much in those two areas. So we needed to tweak what we're doing, both on the testing and data side, as well as the marketing execution side.
Okay. If you could go back in time and change one thing about this project, what would you change?
In ownership, as a leadership principle, do you understand what happened? Are you willing to admit to any mistakes that were made, if there are some? How do you approach the problem? Do you own it, for lack of a better word? This follow-on question specifically is targeting, do you have an introspective mind, and do you look back on your work, and can you speak with credibility and authority that leads me to believe that you understand, especially when you're talking about things that didn't maybe meet the target. And here we're talking about +2 years, -10%. If you could change something, what would you change? Do you have a good sense of that? Do you have the reflectiveness in your frameworks for how you operate as an employee that you will then bring to this company and bring excellence?
If I could change one thing about what this whole thing is a project, there are several sub projects underneath it, but frankly, this whole thing is a project. And if it's one thing I could change, it's how our organization is frankly set up. It's something I didn't have any control over. It's something I'm trying to influence now as we move forward. But we are very siloed. And what does that mean? That means that we have a lack of cohesion and a lack of alignment across different media channels, from shopper to the digital space, which is also separate from me, although it's somewhat dotted line, and the food service space. So the biggest issue that I think we've got at a brand level, which for us, all we do is market. So we don't sell the product. Our parent sells the product, which is our importers. But when you look at how we're designed to have an arm for marketing in the brand side, and marketing shopper side, digital and food service. And these things are too disparate. So the consumer sees inconsistency. They can't tie these things together. And that is suppressing, I think, some of the results, positive results we should be seeing from a branding standpoint as well.
Got it. Okay.
So the solve here is an interesting one, which is, he didn't own the team coming in, and he didn't have the ability when he took on the role, it sounds like, to make any organizational changes. Therefore, the org was what it was. Changing an org is a very blunt instrument, right? It's a hammer, and you go smash an org and you break it apart in a bunch of pieces and reconstitute it as you see fit. And that can work, but really it's an effective tool, or rather it's a tool that only becomes effective if you really understand the why you're busting up the org, right? Busting it up for the sake of busting it up because if all things aren't working is insufficient. What things had different parts of the organization as it was structured that were working versus what wasn't? Based on the answer that that we listened to, the org wasn't moving fast enough. But again, in covering this 7-year window of time without enough detail as to what was working and what wasn't, you look at this answer, it's like, well, I'm going to just change the org. It's kind of the old joke of like, you got a new CEO coming in and the old CEO has left him 3 envelopes and says, hey, when you get into trouble, open the envelopes in the order that they have the numbers on them. And number 1, the CEO has his first miss. He opens the first envelope and it says, blame the previous CEO. Okay, cool. Then he has another miss and he's got another crisis inside the company. He opens the second envelope, says, blame your managers, fire them all. Okay, cool. He does that. And then, he has another miss and he opens up the third envelope and it says, prepare 3 envelopes. So yes, you can change the org, but unless you know why things were broken, it's really not the best answer. So in this specific instance, I think targeting a very high level role at a very visible company known for overachieving, this candidate was, the feedback given was definitely going to struggle. And so the assessment that would have been run in the room for this candidate for ownership, candidates showed a high degree of ownership in acknowledging their failures to hit their target. Missing from their analysis was introspection as to whether the target was reasonable, and parenthetically, with the benefit of hindsight, especially 7 years of it, or even the right one. Beyond that, the candidate did not demonstrate that they had learned anything specific from the miss that would allow them to be successful in the future in a similar situation. Solving the issue with an org change is not always the right answer, and the candidate failed to make the case to support this decision, right? So basically everything I just said. It's always funny reading the assessments as I'm doing these videos and not ahead of time because I don't want to influence my reaction as I rewatch some of these interviews. So that does it for us this week, and that does it for this video. If you like this content, please go ahead and click like. If you've made it this far, you are one of the stalwarts. It gets all the way through the videos. I appreciate you. Go ahead and leave a comment if there is a specific leadership principle that you are looking for. If you enjoyed the content, go ahead and just type ownership down below and let me know that this was a good one. Incidentally, if you are looking for a mock interview, because that is the way to make sure you are prepared for your dream job, better to get a mock interview out of the way and screw it up than screw it up when the job is on the line. Go to interview@.com. Feel free to sign up. The calendar does book up quite a bit of ways out. I am busy. I apologize for that, but I only do so many of these free a week. So the sooner you sign up, the better it is for you. Okay.